He's a good friend. So thankful to have him back on this show. Alex Trujillo, you in the office already. You're working hard. Thanks for joining us again, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I mean, when I've got issues, people, okay, let's just put this into context for Alex, who is an expert at FlightScope. When I've got issues or when I have questions or when I need just a take from the tour, this here is the guy that I always turn to. So Alex, you've been on the show before. For the folks that didn't listen to the previous podcast and now they get to see what you look like, everyone on the tour knows you. Give us the quick bio, who you are, what you do with FlightScope.
Yeah, so I'm the senior sales manager for FlightScope. I've been with the company going on 9 years now. And what I basically do is I manage the golf and baseball divisions, and then I oversee all the tour operations. So I help all of the players out on tour that use our technology and, just provide them with any guidance that they might need.
And how did you get into this stuff?
So I served in the U.S. Army for 10 years, and when I got out of the service, you're welcome. When I got out of the service, I decided I wanted to take a different career path, and I had just got it started in golf. And long story short, I went to a PGM program. One of my instructors or one of my teachers was at the time giving golf lessons to Henry Johnson, the founder and CEO of FlightScope. They needed some interns. I did an internship program, and here we are.
Here we are. Now people, including Bryson, DeChambeau, Bubba Watson, a number of folks, people on the tour, turn to this guy for advice. So now, you've been on here before, and we just talked about parameters, information, readings people can get, what the FlightScope units do for one. And, I use them. I use the little Mevo. I use the X3, and they are so helpful for painting pictures for golfers. And the one thing I've always liked about you, and I'm going to tee us off with this, you looked at me and you said, if you're measuring swings and stuff like this, you must bear in mind that this data is only really accurate if the ball is struck squarely. And I want you to start us with that, because if some golfer is listening to you now saying, well, I want more control and I need this reading to show, it's all about proper contact first, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this mysterious thing in golf, which is called gear effect. And depending on the club you're hitting, it can have a pretty big variance on what your shot shape looks like and what it does. So, for the golfer out there trying to improve the control side of things, learning to strike the club in the proper, in the correct place, let's call it the center or the sweet spot of the club, it is a big important factor in getting your control. And I'm here to tell you, some tour players don't necessarily hit it on the sweet spot. They might hit it a little high right or a little left, but it's very close, and they can repeat it every time. So the repeatability of where you're striking is what's going to bring in that control factor.
And along those lines, I want to talk about this further, because you referenced the tour player, and these guys, are they very beholden to the information they get, or do they just glance? Because you shared a story, and I want you to share that real fast. You were with Bryson at one other event. He was hitting the driver. It wasn't performing like he wanted to. You tell the rest about you brought the fancy camera because it was you that recommended perhaps looking at the golf club before he was looking at his swing.
Yeah, it was an interesting scenario. It was the Wednesday of, it started on the Wednesday of Tour Championship, the year that he won both playoff events.
All right.
And he's obviously hitting the ball very well. And he had kind of already moved towards getting a little bit more speed. He hadn't started the full track, but he was on his way. And I remember during the practice round on Wednesday, he was hitting the ball phenomenal. And I was tracking the shots on the course, and everything was going great. And then when we got to the range, it started to get a little squirrely. So what was happening was the FlightScope was giving us numbers that should produce a draw, but the ball wasn't drawing. It was almost blocking. It was like a push. And so, at that point in time, you're like, okay, is there something wrong with the radar? Is there something wrong with the balls? Is there something wrong with the club? Is his swing changed? But I'm looking at these numbers and I'm like, hey, like path is 4, face is 2. This ball should be coming back. And on Thursday, literally 10 minutes before he tees off, I was talking to Tim. I'm like, hey man, do we by chance have a backup driver? Because I think that something is compromised here. And so we changed the driver head to his backup. He hits the first shot. It's like a path is 4, face is 2, and here's the draw. And I'm like, oh, so long story short, he had basically compromised the head. He had a hairline fracture on the face.
Yeah.
And so there you go. I mean, it was so all of that. You kind of got to go through the steps of, is it the club? Is it the player? Is it the ball? Is it the radar? So you got to kind of go through a checklist of things.
Yeah, and this is where you, and I commend you, and I tell this story often, how you pulled me, well, you didn't pull me aside, but, we're friends, and so you spoke to me in a like, okay, listen, friend sort of manner, where my bent is a golf teacher, and most folks watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, they're informed, right? And so the first place we go is to, well, there's something up with my golf swing. And then they start trying to change themselves. And you were the one that said to me, hey, let's make sure equipment is on point first. Let's make sure the radar is updated firmware-wise. And then only do you start finagling with some guy's golf swing.
Yeah, I mean, I would always say that the golf swing is, especially at that level, the golf swing is probably the last thing you want to finagle with. Because their repeatability is at a very high level. So they're not really, especially on a Wednesday before a tournament, they're not really going to be changing that golf swing too much. So, I mean, there's a good checklist that people can go by, but equipment, I feel like a lot of times is forgotten. People just think, well, yeah, I've had this driver for 6 years. It's good to go.
Yeah.
You can get hairline fractures in shafts. You can get hairline fractures in clubs. And, then you're kind of working against yourself if you start tweaking the swing.
And you start helping yourself from the frying pan into the fire. You talk about repeatability, and I want to start there because we're going to talk about power, control first, and for me, more control, and then some power and speed. And repeatability, on the FlightScope that I use, you can get the chart of all the data, and at the bottom you have totals, and you have an average. And then you have DEV, which I'm guessing is the deviation between the top and the bottom number. Yes. That to me is repeatability. So for the golfers listening, I want you to inform them and say, hey, look down there. Let's just not look at one swing all of the time. Let's get an average of our performance and how much movement there is between in terms of that deviation window.
Yeah, it's like the forgotten data parameter or stat, it's that deviation or deviance. It can give you great insight into, let's say you have someone who you believe is a good ball striker. Maybe you feel like you're a good ball striker and you look down there and if you have great deviations in certain areas, then maybe that's not the case. For example, let's say club path or even face angle, because those two kind of go hand in hand.
All right.
The tighter the deviation. So let's say on average, your club path is 4, you're a draw player and your club path is 4 degrees to the right.
Okay.
A deviation on path should be less than 1 degree, 1 degree or less. I would say 1 degree, more than 1 degree is probably you're going to start getting different shapes.
So for example, you say, well, let's say you're saying 4. So when you say 1 degree, sort of 3 or 5, and that's that window, right? Okay, good.
That's kind of a window, general rule of thumb. And then for the face, it would be the same thing. But if you look down there and your deviation is 7, or 5, now more than likely, the higher the deviations is on the face and path, the higher the handicap of the player. Just because there isn't that consistency and that repeatability. So that's one area where you can focus in and hone in. And what most players will find is once that deviations on those numbers starts to get tighter, their ball striking and where they're hitting it on the face will typically get better as well. So it's like a puzzle, you're just trying to get all these things working in the same towards the same goal or same direction.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to hold up my watch here, and this is not a watch brag, but you showed me this. There's 360 degrees on a wristwatch face. and 1 degree is 1 second. And then when I explain that to people, they're like, man, this adjustment from 7 that you reference to 4 degrees is not that much. And it seems so tiny, yet it can have such a profound effect on how the golf ball is struck. Comment further on
that. Yeah, so it's a lot of people that maybe haven't used the technology or have the knowledge. They're like, well, I can see 1 degree of club path or 1 degree of face angle. That's a little tough. If you look at your watch and you notice that there's 360 degrees and 1 second is a degree, so it's a small number. But what I can tell you is the biggest key to control always is just going to be if you can match the half of your path. So let me give you an example. It doesn't matter if your club path is 8 degrees to the right. Okay. As long as your face on average is 4 degrees close to that path, which is half, the ball will always come back to the target.
Yeah.
On the center strike. Let's just make that clear. There you go. And then the same thing for a cut shot, you know? So if you, and that's what most of these guys do. These guys on tour, they don't all have a club path of 2 degrees right or 2 degrees left. Bryson is 6 or 7 out. Rory's, 6 to 8 out. Yeah. A DJ could be 2 left. A Kupka could be, 2 or 3 left, depending on the shot shape they're hitting. So now they don't get into the double digits, but they will always have their path. Yeah, so the ball is always working back to the target.
Yeah.
You can have a player like a Bubba Watson who is more of a shot shaper. But what's interesting is even when he hits those big shapes, he has the correct matchup on face and path. Yeah. So now the numbers are more extreme because he's, obviously he's trying to create a lot of curvature, but when he needs to go and hit that stock shot, it's always going to be half the path.
You know what I've learned, and again, this is my mea culpa, and I'm talking as a golf instructor, and you've done a beautiful job of saying, hey, to draw the thing for a right hand, the path must be to the right, face must be to the left of the path, fade the other way around, path left, face to the right of that. And I was always the one, if I saw a number that was wide, start fixing on how the club was swung. But you watch Bubba, and you have intimate knowledge of this. He moves those path numbers just by alignment. And he's not handcuffed by, trying to aim in a certain way and swing a certain way. If he needs the path more to the right, he's like, whatever, man, I'll just aim more to the right. And so he plays that way. And I think that should be wonderfully liberating to most folks listening to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I would say just even in my personal game, I don't get to play much. As you know, people in the industry, it's tough for us to play. But, when I was working on and when I was learning the technology and the numbers, I would go out and try to produce the different shot shapes. And what I learned was that once you have a very good understanding of, okay, this feeling produces, 6 left on the path with 3 right on the face, and I have this nice little pull cut, or if I want to hit a slice, it's like 8 and 3 or 8 and 4.
All right.
I feel like a golfer, you have more tools in your bag when you learn how to, hey, if I need to hit a certain shape, this is what I do. And I feel like the FlightScope technology, that's where it really helps you, is it gives you, yes, you're looking at analytical data, but it starts to you start to match up feel with the data. And, Bryson everyone thinks that Bryson is extremely technical, and yes, he is. But he tells me all the time, he's like, listen, everything that I do is to create a feel.
Yeah.
The way that he hits certain wedge shots on his clock system, his swing planes and stuff, it's all to create the feel, and it's based on the numbers. So he knows, hey, if I need to hit a 10 o'clock that's going to go 70 yards, that's the feeling, and that's the data that produces. So you can use technology to help you create feel, which is what you're going to need on the golf course.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about zero numbers in a second, but before I go there, I want to cap this conversation a little bit by going, okay, you've said to us, well, if the face is half of the path, you're going to get something that curves back to the target line. Can you sort of generically say to us, okay, let's say if the path was 8 to the left and the face is 7 to the left, then you start seeing straights. And if the path is 8 left and the face is 9 left, that's when you see pulled hooks. Can you sort of package that a little bit for us, please?
Yeah, I can actually give you a real world example. I was working with a player. This is probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I noticed that the path was severely left. He was it's a big pool, like pool cut guy.
Right.
That was kind of the shot shape. But I'm noticing like path was like always like over 10 left. It was like 10, 11, 12. And I was like, man, if under pressure you square the face, this ball is out of bounds because the path is so excessive to the left that, you know, if you match the face to that, you've basically just pulled it. Mm-hmm. It's gone. And a 2 or 3 weeks later, the player gets in a situation where I don't know if it was a playoff or I can't remember the situation, but it was in tournament.
Okay.
And under the gun, it happened. Mm-hmm. You know, the face squared, and it's not that it's pulled and it's in the rough. Now it's pulled and it's OB. Mm-hmm. So that's why you will always see most of those guys out there. They don't get the path numbers too excessive. So they never go into the double digits. They try to stay, because if you miss one, if you do square a face up to a path, then hey, at least you're in the rough, or you know, you're still in play. But if you get too excessive on those boundaries, you are out of play. And that's what they try to eliminate.
On the other side, and for the folks listening to this, check out the vodcast. I'm using like path and face and stuff. So on the other side of that cone is how I sort of see it, where the face is pointing somewhere in between the path and 0, the target line. On the other side of the cone, what about if like the path is 4 right and the face is 1 left, but 1 left of the target line, so 5 degrees shut to the path? Most of the tour pros are trying to avoid that sort of thing, where you're trying to just keep the ball away from the weak side of the target, right?
Yeah, so in that scenario, you get what's called basically that's where you get the hook, or you get the duck hook, because so on an iron, or on irons typically, the face and the face represents about 75% of the start line of the golf shot.
Say that again. I want people to realize that face is king and the path is the queen. All right, go again.
Yes. So on irons, typically, this is just a general, the face dictates the start line by 75%. On woods, right, and then on woods, it's 85%. And the reason for that is because woods typically have higher ball speeds.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you a really good example for your listeners and your viewers. If you take a commercial airplane and you take a fighter jet. So if a commercial airplane flying at 500 miles an hour banks his wings 5 degrees, it's going to have a general nice smooth turn. But now if a fighter jet going Mach 3 banks his wing 5 degrees, that turn is going to be very extreme and excessive.
And he knocks the pilot out. He puts the pilot to sleep.
Yeah, pretty much. G-forces. So the same thing happens with the golf ball. Is the more you increase the ball speed, the more the tighter those numbers need to be, and the more precise you have to be. A great example is long drivers. Long drivers, they get 8 balls to hit a grid that's, I think, 50 yards wide, 45 or 50 yards. And they might hit 2 or 3 because they're not swinging for accuracy, they're swinging for distance.
Yeah.
But when you're at those high of ball speeds, you're going to create a little slight change in face and path, and you're going to create massive curvature.
Yeah.
So just remember that iron 75% is dictated on the start line, the face, and then on woods it's 85%.
You know what, Alex? And I'm to remind me of my zeros conversation in question here in a second, but now you've got my mind going, okay? Because I've long said, in fact, I said this on an interview with someone last night when they were interviewing me, and they're like, okay, advise the golfers in the era of speed. And I was like, speed's always been a thing from way back, it just wasn't as hyped as what it is now. And power was always an advantage. But I said, if you're good at shot number 3, you're going to make lots of 3s and 4s. And if you're good at shot number 1, you're going to make fewer 6s and 7s and 8s. And chasing speed, you've said it so much, and I would like you to put a capper on this. the margins are finer. High speed swinging, that face gets deviated some, and you're going to see some stuff that's like sightseeing all over the golf course.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the long driver is the perfect example of that. I mean, there's long drivers that are really good golfers. I mean, I believe Berkshire played college golf. Eddie Fernandez. I don't know if you've seen Eddie Fernandez's swing. This guy's got
he's awesome.
But he doesn't. I mean, if he's playing a golf course, yeah, he's going to go after some. But he's not playing at 100% long drive speed, right? Because he knows he's got to tighten in the cone. And one thing with Bryson that people don't realize is that he has set up his equipment so that he can go after speed, but still maintain the control of the face. He has one length irons. He has very, very big grips. He has Jumbo Max grips, which have a massive diameter, which help him have more, he has more contact on his hand so he can control the face better. And then also the way that he swings the club, as you know, it's very rigid, and he's trying to limit any moving parts or any hinges. So he's gained speed, but at the same time, he knows that I just can't lose all control.
Oh man, choirs of angels, you are now preaching to folks, and I hope they're listening to you, because that's what happens. They see a commercial on TV and it's speed, max speed, blah, 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 on the range swinging like banshees, and they're just covering the place. And then they hit that one ball and they're like, yeah, and they go on the golf course, and then they wonder why they're not making the lowest scores they should.
No, absolutely. I think, and especially for the amateur game, you start moving back in tee boxes, and now you feel like you have to hit it further because, if not, you're hitting 4 irons into greens. And it's like, hey, you're not playing for money. If you want to enjoy the game, move up a little bit so that you can have your mid iron or short irons into greens and enjoy the game and work on, because at the end of the day, if you take a guy like Bryson, he's a professional. I mean, he can hit a wedge shot, so he can hit it into an area that he can still play. But again, even with the speed chase that he's done, he knows he cannot forget about face control. He has to gear it to a way where he still has face control. I've seen him produce over 205 miles an hour ball speed, but I think he's yet to produce that on the golf course because you're giving up a lot of face control at that speed. So yeah, he's 190s. He can touch the 200s on the golf course, but he's not really going at where he has more in the tank. So, but he knows when you're out there playing for money, he has to, keep that face control.
Great Jack Nicklaus said he swung at 75, 80% most of the day, and he really only let one go once or twice around when the conditions were correct. And I shared this anecdote in this interview last night about the power thing, and I was like, I can snow ski a little bit. I'm from South Africa. We don't have much snow and skiable mountains down there. And I'm like, you'll never find me on the Black Diamond slope. I'll kill myself. So I'm going to cruise down the comfy stuff and have some fun and be upright and enjoy the expedition, very much like playing golf off the correct tee that you pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, again, just another example, a guy like Bubba or a guy like Tony Finau. Tony Finau doesn't swing at 100% because, he's trying to hit the shot. Yeah, he has plenty of power. Bubba's the same way. I've seen Bubba hit drivers that he calls it the dink, where he just dinks it out there. It's like this small little cut slice,
and it's
that
low.
Goes 260, 270 yards. But he knows if I have to hit a fairway, I know if I swing that swing, I know that I can hit a fairway. Now, if he needs to step on one, he can, but he doesn't step on it for 14 holes. There might be 1 or 2 holes that he really goes after.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'm going to get back to the power thing, and I'm making notes feverishly if you're watching this thing. I've seen many a golfer. I've seen some college golfers, all of them good. You've probably met some of these young men, and they're good players, and they're working to improve. And I had one guy, we won't name him. If he's listening, he'll probably know who he is, who was unreal with the driver. And the deviation in the numbers was good. With the driver, his swing would sort of average from about 1 to about 2.5 degrees to the right. So very good, yeah. He thought to get more control, he had to get this to 0. And I said to him, not ever. Alex, you're the expert. Please convince folks why it's better to have some shape as opposed to aiming for that 0 number all the time.
Yeah, and it's just the relationship of the face and the path. It doesn't matter if you swing 0-0. You can. It's probably harder to try to create a 0-0 strike than it is to create, let's say, a 2-1 or a 2-0 swing. The 0-0 stuff is for a robot. We're not robots. We have, we have moving parts. We have feelings. We have emotions. And I believe that that's the reason why most tour players have a specific shot shape. And shot shape is not created with 0-0. Shot shape is created with a deviation, a proper deviation between the face and the path. Chasing that 0-0 is, boy, that's a train wreck waiting to happen.
And then along those lines too, like you talk about the player having a go-to, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes the draw doesn't draw like it normally does. And then they make modifications, alignment-wise or whatever. But if you are got a 0 path, if you get to face a degree left or a degree right, all of a sudden you're seeing, two-sided misses.
Right, because what happens then is that if your path is 0, now and the face is off of 0, now the ball actually starts to work away from the target, not towards the target. So at least if you have a face that's half the path, the ball will always work back to the target, or let's say to the center of the golf course. Where when you have a 0 path and now you have deviations in either direction, now you're working towards the bad areas.
One more thing about this control. We haven't talked about high or low yet. I'll talk about that with power. The acceptable, I'm not going to use the word dispersions. Proximity to the flag is one thing on the tour, but if I've hit 10 7-irons and getting them within a certain range, I think a lot of folks miss this because they expect the good balls to be landing right next door to each other. But the longer the club gets, the wider that circle. I can't think of the number off the top of my head gets. Let's talk about that a little bit, please.
Yeah, so it's just your dispersion patterns or your grouping.
Grouping, that's it. They were.
As you get into the longer irons, your grouping is going to get a little bit bigger. If you just go on ShotLink and you look up the average proximity to the hole for, let's say, 7 irons, or let's say 175 to 100 or 200 and so on and so forth, when you look at those numbers, you'll be like, I really thought these guys hit it closer. Yeah, they hit it closer when you're watching on TV and they show a shot it gets hit closer. But on average, they're within a certain, grouping. And so let's just do what is the average green size? Let's just say that the average green size is, I don't know, what do you think? 30 yards.
3,500 square feet.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So that's about, when we say 30 yards wide, 15 and 15, we'll say on that, maybe a little more, but whatever. So if you have a 7-iron and you basically know you have 15 yards on either side of the target to land on the green, I mean, anything, especially from 7-iron pass, especially for an amateur golfer, I mean, just hitting the green you're well within the averages that you need to be. But what happens with most amateur golfers is you're trying to flag chase. So you might hit it in a spot where now you've hit a slope and you bounce off the green, you short side yourself, and then it just snowballs. So a very good tool with FlightScope is you have the ability of seeing your groupings per club. So you can really work on honing in your groupings for each individual club, and working on a specific shot shape or the same shot shape will obviously help you get that grouping tighter. Because if you're hitting shots in both directions, your grouping is going to get wider just because there's going to be misses in there with both shots going into the greens. So again, just from perspective from the tour, exactly. It's funny. Me and Bubba talked about this last week at Travelers. He's like, man, I'm thinking about just really working on maybe just going with one shot shape, which is very hard for him. I mean, he loves to shape the ball in different directions. But we just kind of were talking about like, hey, what do you think would happen if you did play a tournament where you only played one shot shape, unless obviously you got yourself into a spot where you needed to hit a different shape. But just the curiosity of, he's like, I feel like I can probably tighten everything up.
Yeah.
And so even a player like him is thinking about how do I get this grouping tighter so that I can give myself a better chance at making this putt.
Yeah, and like I'm illustrating here, that's sort of my visual of a circle, right? And groupings could, sort of be more elliptical, more oblong, but something that people want to bear in mind, because the amateur golfer listening to this, they get all freaked out if they see something left and right. But that grouping gets smaller, to get back to what you said initially, if contact is more consistent and the distance with each club, that there's not too much widening long and short and not just left and right.
Yeah, and just to jump onto that, what you said about distance, and I think this is a big problem that amateur golfers have, is they see how far they hit the ball on the golf course. So they're seeing carry, roll, total, right? But they don't actually really understand how far they carry the golf ball. And that has a huge impact on what your grouping looks like. So yeah, your 7-iron, you might hit 175, but maybe on average, you're only hitting it 160. And when you hit a bad one, it might only be 145 or 150. So you have a massive gap in your grouping there. So if you start working on, maybe I don't need to hit it 175, I can hit it 160, and now you tighten up your grouping.
That is such good advice. The carry number, and to get to the FlightScope, you go down the data and you'll see the average, and the average is crucial because the average is who you are, and then you see the long and the short numbers. That's kind of who you are too. And if it doesn't jive with what you think, maybe you need to revisit what you're doing on the course, because that may be the mistake that you're making out there, right?
Yeah, and then what happens is you get to a scenario on the golf course where you have a forced carry, and now your decision making is incorrect because you're going off of, maybe one time that you saw a ball you hit total was 175, but now you're forced with a 170 and you can't carry it that far. So that's just a great one of the quickest ways to really improve your game is just understanding how far do I actually carry every club in my bag on average.
Yeah. Okay. Contact and then power. Numbers to look for when folks are measuring. I've learned more and more, and you talk to me about speed profiles and stuff, and that's still way above my head. But just in terms, we've talked path, we've talked face, we've talked acceptable. The angle of attack is crucial, and then also where the base of the swing is, or the lowest part of the swing in relation to the golf ball. And you guys have a measurement which measures where the bottom is of the arc in relation to ball contact. Let's talk about that difference a little bit as it sort of goes through the bag, please.
Yeah, so the parameter you're talking about is low point. And it's just basically where the lowest point of your swing arc is.
Yes.
And it does have a correlation with angle of attack. And just for the viewers and the listeners to know, is angle of attack doesn't mean how much shaft lean you have. Angle of attack is the direction that the club head is moving, whether it's negative, like so going down into the ball, or whether it's positive, like you would have maybe a driver where, you basically, the club bottoms out and then it starts moving up towards the ball.
Yeah. So
you can, for example, you can be a clean picker. You can pick the ball and still have a negative angle of attack. Yeah. So maybe I think Strick is probably considered a clean picker, but you're still hitting down on it, which is where you're going to get that compression effect. So those numbers go hand in hand. So for example, if let's say you're hitting a 7-iron and you're hitting 4 down on it, so angle of attack is -4,
which is
that typically means
at the tour level.
Pretty standard. That just means that your swing arc, your low point might be, let's say, it might be 1. So that just means that the bottom of your swing arc happened 2 or 3 inches in front of where angle of attack happened. And just, this might get a little bit more in detail, but at FlightScope, we report all of our numbers with the exception of low point, horizontal and vertical swing planes. All of our numbers are reported at touch before there's any energy transfer from the club to the ball.
And that's unlike
But low
other launch
point,
monitors, right?
it is. It
Mhm.
is. Other launch monitors and other radars, some say that they measure at maximum compression and so on and so forth. But we believe that the cleanest reporting happens before you transfer any energy from the club to the ball. Because once you transfer energy from the club to the ball, you've changed the direction of the
Yeah.
club head, correct?
Mhm.
So, so for example, you're hitting 4 down on the 7-iron. That means that your low point is going to be in front of the golf ball.
Yes.
If you're hitting up on it, so let's say you're hitting a driver that's going, let's say +5, you're going to have a negative low point because the lowest part of your swing arc happened behind the golf ball.
Mhm.
And so those numbers correlate with each other, and it just gives you an understanding of, okay, what does my swing arc look like?
Yeah.
And that's very key to consistent ball striking.
Yeah, I think so. And, again, people start to think when they think control of just, well, at the flag, but where the bottom of your swing is located is going to have a huge say-so in this thing. And there is a correlation between the swing path and the direction in which the club is moving and what the angle of attack is. Because if the club's on the way down, the path is likely more to the right unless you wildly misalign, right?
Yeah, and I see this on the range all the time as people are looking at their divots, and
Mm.
it's like, the divot can cause a lot of confusion because you can have a perfectly straight divot at your target, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what you should be doing,
Because
because it all depends on the shot shape you're trying to create and where your angle of attack should be. So, if you're hitting down on a club, to be honest with you, let's say you're hitting down on a 7-iron, to be honest with you, the divot should probably look a little left, if anything, because by the time that club starts to interact with the ground, the way that your body is moving, the way that the handle's coming through, the club actually starts moving a little left.
yeah.
So, but again, that's not like everyone's going to be the same. It just depends on the shot shape that you're hitting. So divots can be, they can cause some confusion if you don't understand what's happening.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point there. And that's why for most folks, amateur golfers, club golfers listening to this, you hear that most pros are like, what are you working on? Well, I'm trying to swing more left, because they naturally approach more to the right, where the club golfer naturally approaches more to the left. And so they're trying to make sure that club is turning around its arc. Because if they're coming in, going to the right, and then they continue to the right, then it's right field sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that's when the old Hazel rockets come in.
Okay. So we've dealt with control. We've talked about zeros. We've talked about acceptable variances for most club golfers, anywhere in the single digits. Just striving to be just that little bit less is a good deal, but face is king. Let's talk about speed now. It's real. It's an advantage, but if you manage it well, it's a big deal. But most folks look at club head speed. The guys you work with are addressing that, but they're looking at the ball speed. So let's talk
Yeah,
about that a little bit, please.
Yeah, ball speed is king. I mean, it's at the end of the day, the ball speed is the byproduct of whatever you've done in the backswing and the downswing and what you've presented to the golf ball. So, yes, you can swing at 140 miles an hour, but if you don't hit it in the center of in the center of the, let's call it center of restitution, the COR, or in the sweet spot, then you're not going to get the maximum effect of the maximum trampoline effect and the maximum ball speed. So, yes, of course, if you swing the club faster, you should typically get more ball speed, but the strike of the golf ball is very important to maximize that, that ball speed. What I've seen, from my experience, and obviously I've worked with some guys that can swing it pretty fast, is when they are working on speed, they're not necessarily too concerned about where the golf ball is going.
Yeah.
They're just trying to, they're just, so when they're working on speed, they're not too concerned about where the golf ball is going.
Yeah.
However, shortly after they're done working on speed, now they're trying to hone in where the golf ball is going. So let's say that you reached your new personal record of 120 miles an hour club speed, and you reached your, let's say, 170 ball speed.
Yeah.
Well, now when you're done doing all of your crazy swings, now you say, okay, I need to hone in making sure that I can get this ball moving in the correct manner, and striking it in the proper way. So yeah, a speed session, you might get to 130 miles an hour club speed, but maybe when you hone it back, now you're down to 127. And that's all that it really is. It's just every time you're trying to just break, you're trying to surpass that, hey, if today I was 120, tomorrow I want to be 121. And then I'm going to hone back. And then 122, and then I'm going to hone back. And so because you can't just go swing for the fences and then take that to the golf course. No. That's not going to work well.
Yeah. And it's sort of moving your base camp a little bit higher up the mountain each time. You remind me of, I gave an online lesson through Skillets to a person last night, and I'd been helping him some, and there was drastic, remarkable improvements. And he obviously knows something about the stuff. And so he's looking at his swing on video and analyzing it. And he comes back to me and he goes, well, I'd like to get more shaft lean, which you referenced. And my response to him, and I'm not sure you wanted to hear this, but I'll get the response here maybe today or tomorrow. He was like, yeah. So I said to him, look, with the speed at which you're creating club head-wise, and for that matter, I don't know the ball, I didn't know what his readings were, but I could sort of get a feel for what it would be. I was like, any more shaft lean, and you're going to actually start losing power and losing carry, because there is that sweet spot too between how much you're de-lofting the face and hitting down, because if you don't have speed enough, that's just going to turn into nothing. So I want you to talk about that, please.
Yeah, and that's the matchup that you have to have between dynamic loft and angle of attack. So
and that creates, for folks who might not know what that is.
So dynamic loft is the loft that you present to the golf ball. So let's say statically, if you just pick up your driver out of your bag, it might be an 11-degree driver. Yeah. But dynamically, you might present 7 degrees of loft to the golf ball, or maybe you present 13 degrees. It just depends on how you present the golf club to the ball. So an example with Bryson, even with Bubba, is they have low lofted drivers. I think Bryson's like 5. He might be even less than 5 now. But it's because his angle of attack is excessively high. So let me just give you let me set a picture for you. Okay. If the dynamic loft is 10 degrees and the angle of attack is 0, in theory, you've created 10 degrees of spin loft.
Okay.
Okay. So the higher the spin loft, the more spin you create. So with a driver, you kind of want to, let's say you want it at 2,500 spin rate. Yeah. So if my dynamic loft is at 10, then I'm going to try to increase my angle of attack to +5. And so now that cone is only 5 degrees of spin loft. Mm-hmm. So that's the matchup that they're doing, is because his angle of attack is so high, he's trying to get a lower lofted club so that he can basically get less spin loft. Same thing that long drivers do.
And on the other side of that, you talk about Bryson hitting on the upward segment of the swing. For most golfers here who chop down on the thing a little bit more, if you've got 1 degree down with a driver and you've got yourself a 9-degree driver or whatever, you're probably not getting very much out of it. And then from the teaching point of view, that cone is the crocodile mouth, you call it, that's bigger. And then the next thing, folks are tilting back and they're doing all sorts of stuff to try and, cover up for what they're seeing in the ball flight.
Correct. So it's just a matchup. You do have some guys on tour that hit down slightly on it because they're maybe hitting that little cut, or they're getting a little more control. But what they do is they just make sure that the dynamic loft is a little lower so that they don't create too much spin loft. And so it's just a matchup, and that's why you see all these guys with all sorts of technologies, because they're just trying to measure and understand what's happening in the impact interval.
Mm-hmm. An easy way to change things for me is tee height and body location in relation to the golf ball. And there was this big brouhaha a few seasons ago on social media where someone, a Golf Channel person, made some quip about hitting down on the driver versus hitting up, and then all of this, a bunch of the launch monitor instructors came out and absolutely scared him. I'm like, if you want to hit the fairway, find it, tee it down, move the ball slightly back. But if you want to crank one, you got to start raising the tee a little bit. Your thoughts on that one, please.
And absolutely, tee height is crucial, as well as ball position.
Yeah.
I learned, I had a little session with Bubba on the range. I was visiting him in Pensacola, and we were going to play a little bit of golf. And I asked him, I'm like, Bubba, to me it looks like you don't really change your body alignment that much, but I see that you obviously change your ball position a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, that's just how I change my low and high, but it's also how I can create up or down angle of attacks. So if he's trying to hit that stinger, then he kind of keeps everything the same. He tries to hold the shaft lean in, and then he puts the ball back. And the same thing the other way is you start moving the ball forward. So if you just start playing with that, you're going to change the way that your trajectory launches. Not that this is a baseball podcast or blog, but
Principles
Pete Rose, Pete Rose, who was one of I'd say the all-time greatest hitter, has the most hits in the MLB. He said all he did was in the plate was he changed how he was set up to the plate. So, if they were pitching him inside, he'd back up. If they were pitching him away, he'd go in. If it was slower pitching, he'd move up. If it was faster pitching, he'd move back. And it's kind of the same principle with golf. It's just you can move certain things without changing your golf swing to produce a different trajectory.
You know what I hear? I mean, that is, it sounds so simple, and most golf people are like, this game's so freaking hard. It can't be that simple, but it is. But there's genius in that sort of thing. But the mistake that most of the club golfers make is they're so switched off before they hit the shot. They've got the distance, they've range finded this thing to the flag, nothing else. And then they just get over the ball and they're swinging away hoping, where there's not that adjustment, ball position, body-wise, where's the wind, blah, blah, blah. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I think too, to that point, is there's just a lot of wasted time on the practice area as well, where you just go to a range and it's just rifling one ball after another. And then here's another baseball reference. Sorry, I'm big into baseball too. But Albert Pujols would always say, I don't care the amount of pitches that I get in a practice session. I care about the quality. Okay. And it's true. I think it's true to golf. Is if you go to the range with 100 balls, why don't you just work on, hey, today I'm going to work on this certain shot shape, and I want to see how close I can get this grouping. Mm-hmm. Not just I mean, I see guys all the time, they go to the range, they don't even have a target. They're just rifling golf balls. And I feel like you're just wasting your time. You can't expect to do that on the range and then go on the golf course where now you're target bound and you're going to hit it to a target. You haven't even practiced it. So
that's almost the perfect segue to how I want to close this. And I'm so thankful for your time. Because of your advice, and because I've grown up as a golf teacher in my 50 years and fabulous, it doesn't matter what the golfer is working on. It could be a wrist alignment, it could be pivot, it could be anything, right? I always down their zero line or the ball and target line, angle an alignment rod in there at about a 45-degree angle, so there's a visual for them. And then no matter what they're working on, then they've got to start it to the right and turn it back if they're a drawer, or they've got to start it to the left and turn it back if they're a fader, right-handed, obviously. And if they fade the thing too much, I'm going to have them feel draw so that they can get a sense for and see visually I'm trying to do this, but they're not locked up in the wrist alignments. They are now still delivering what's required for maximum ball performance, control, and power.
Yeah, no, that's great, and giving them that visual is an amazing way to just knowing, hey, this is my intended target line, and just working on that is going to be a great improvement.
Hey, all of the stuff you shared is available on your guys' website. I know that. I know you've got these little modules and stuff on there. So, Alex, please share where the folks can go for that, and also where they can find more from you, please, social media and stuff.
Yeah. So they can visit us on FlightScope.com. We have an e-learning platform as well where they can get a lot of this information. They can just go to FlightScope.com and find it. And then they can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter. Just look FlightScope Golf, and they'll find it there. my social media stuff, I don't really do much on it, but they can find me through Facebook and Instagram. So
appreciate you joining us, man. You're one of the best, and you. I think the key to you, and I've said this to so many folks, is you can take a very intricate concept and make it, very easy to understand. So thank you for what you do, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much, and say hello to the family for me.
We'll do it.